Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is our special program on Proposition CC, the effort to de-Bruce Tabor. My special guests today include the DA from Arapahoe County, Douglas County, and Elbert County.
And Lincoln.
And Lincoln County. Oh my gosh, don't forget little Lincoln County. George Brockler. George, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here.
And the Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action, Michael Fields, another veteran of the program. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
And from the Colorado Education Association, the president, Amy Baca-Olert, is with us as well. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, it's great having the CEA represented. And another veteran of the program, Scott Wasserman, the president of the Bell Policy Center. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Excited to be here.
All right, so Scott, tell me a little bit about what voters should know in terms of what exactly does Proposition CC do?
Sure. So at the heart of Proposition CC is a simple question from your legislature, which is, do you think your community services should improve as the economy improves? And so what is being asked in this ballot measure is whether or not the state can lift the revenue cap on the amount of tax dollars that it's able to take in and spend on public services. And specifically in this question, what they're asking is, can we spend those dollars that come in over that cap on things like K-12 education, higher education, and roads? Okay, so the concept is to essentially, the term is to de-Bruce, a term referring to the author of the 1992 Tabor Amendment, Doug Bruce, to de-Bruce Tabor statewide. And so the idea is to say the state collect whatever money the state already collects under the current tax structure, it should keep. But right now, the way it works is that there's a formula in Tabor that says this is how much you get to spend each year. And if you collect more than that amount, you have to refund to taxpayers the difference. And so what Proposition CC is really about is it's saying whatever the state collects currently, it gets to keep and spend. Is that a fair statement, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair. I think the other thing, though, is knowing that we have a higher tax liability, the fact that the government's going to be keeping and spending more of your money, I think the average person would look at that as a tax increase. That this is, it says without raising taxes on the ballot in a nice, I think biased way. But the average person, you're going to be paying more, not getting those refunds back. So this is about taking your Tabor tax refunds.
Okay, but in all fairness, tax rates are not being increased. And so, I think it's hard to argue that it's a tax increase in the sense that taxes increase every year. I mean, assuming the economy grows and assuming we're all earning more. But what it really does is it says, in the past, you were entitled to refunds if we get past a certain point in collecting taxes. Under this proposal, there won't be any more refunds. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, but it's a little too complicated. I'd say this, Aaron. Look, when you use the term tax to cover both rates and burden, it's misleading. If this had said, hey, without raising tax rates, would you? But it doesn't. The fact is the tax burden will be increased. Here, and I got to use this in DA terms. If I go to a restaurant and it's a $15 meal and I give them a $20 bill and they say, we're just going to keep the rest, that meal didn't cost $15. That meal cost $20.
I know you never tip that percentage, George.
Well, I'm glad you put it in terms of a tip, because that's really what the legislature is asking for here. Have we done a good enough job with the $32.5 billion that we have every year that you want to tip us with money that we don't deserve under the law forever and ever? And not just for you, not just for now, but for your kids, their kids, all the other kids in the future.
Well, and I think what's important is that we're asking the voters that question. Are you electing to do this? This is putting the question before the voters. 174 out of our 178 school districts have already asked the voters this question, and the voters have approved that. Many of our municipalities have asked voters this question, and the voters have approved that. So we're putting the vote to the voters, which is what Tabor asks us to do. And I think as citizens, we should have a right to weigh in on that vote. Is this what we want? Or do we want to be the wealthiest economy in the country, yet underfund our schools by $2,700 below the national per pupil average? So we're asking the voters, what do you want to do? And that, I think, is the most important question.
I agree with that. I agree that we should be asking the voters, but when the language that is chosen runs through no unbiased filter, when it is the legislature who wants the money, who dictates the language, and it's not checked by anybody, you get the kind of deceptive language that you have here in CC. Now, I agree with this. If we went to the legislature, the legislature went to us and said terms like refunds, permanent, Tabor, give up your constitutional rights. Those are all things that are captured in it. In fact, if you look at the language, this is what CC says. Will you permanently forfeit your and your heirs' constitutional right to refunds of all taxes you paid in excess of what the government is legally allowed to keep to fund whatever projects this or future legislatures may decide? Wait, no, that's not what it says. That's what it does. What it says is, without raising taxes, which is deceptive, and to better fund public schools, higher education, roads and bridges, to save little puppies, may the state keep and spend all the revenue it annually collects after a certain date.
I caught that little editorial insertion. Scott,
I guess I want to, there's a couple of things that I think are really troublesome in the opposition's arguments, because it all relies on a very archaic ideology that is completely dependent upon Tabor and Tabor's demand that we argue how many angels you can, put on top of a pinhead, as opposed to actually talking about the needs of our community. This is a very simple question, and I think we all agree that this is not raising your tax rate. Your taxes are not going to go up if Proposition CC passes. What will happen is, the question is, are you willing to defer a very periodic Tabor refund? And we should talk about the Tabor refund mechanism, because I think the opposition keeps making it sound like an income tax refund is absolutely automatic anytime we go over the Tabor surplus.
So since 1992, so that's 28 years, 29 years, almost 3 decades. How many times have we gotten
5 or 6 times the citizens of the state of Colorado have seen Tabor refunds. Those Tabor refunds have varied. Sometimes it's been as much as $100. Other times it's been as much as $17
per person?
Per person.
Per
So what we're looking at here, the estimates vary, but you're looking at somewhere between $26 and maybe $76 if you're a joint household. And I'm not here to debate whether or not that's small or big. The point is the question that's being asked is, would you rather put that $17 in your pocket, or would you rather invest it in things like roads, in schools, and in public colleges, right? And I think our argument is that even though we have this great economy, and that's why I say, do you think your community should improve as the economy improves, right? Because we have the so-called #1 economy, and yet we're all aware of the deficiencies that are going on.
All right, so I think voters, one of the questions voters will have is, if this, and I think in the first year the estimate is the difference would be about $250 million. The state budget totals about $30 billion. Roughly half of that is federal money, half of that is actually state funding. So you're looking at maybe of the total budget a 8 or 9% increase in terms of that available or flexible revenue. And so the question I think a lot of voters have, and I'd like each of you to answer this, and George, I'll start with you, is how am I as a voter assured that that money, which is supposed to be split pretty much equally between transportation needs, K through 12 needs, educational needs, and higher education needs, how are we going to be assured that that money actually goes to those specific challenges? George?
You can't. And the reason you can't is because this is a statutory change, not a constitutional change. And that means, and you know who said this language? It's not me. It's someone named Casey Becker, who was the prime sponsor for this referendum.
The Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House. And I like Casey quite a bit.
She doesn't say the same about you.
And I think that's because I'm taller than she is. She's the only person I'm taller than.
I think Amy is taller than Casey.
But that may
Only
be
with
true
my
too.
heels on.
But the bottom line is this: because it's a statutory change, any legislature, this one or a future one, could simply get amongst themselves and say, let's vote to send all the money that fits under CC somewhere else, and we'd be powerless to do anything about it. So right now, they've put it in terms of education, roads, but it doesn't have to go there, not even past this specific year, because they can make that change. But when you say what the important question is, let me put a different question to this, and that is, has the legislature proven to you that they don't have enough money to spend to get these projects done? And my answer is no, and not just my answer, the Denver Post says the legislature doesn't need more money. I mean, at the end of the day, Tabor, if you listen to the opponents of Tabor, they say it has crippled state government, and the best evidence of that is that since 1990, population has grown by 60%. And because of Tabor, government has only been allowed to grow by a very anemic 306%. And yet we can't figure out a way to spend money and prioritize it on things like schools and teachers where it should go.
All right, so I want to hear from Michael, but first I'd like to hear a response from that. Scott, can you elucidate?
There are so many things to respond to, and I don't want to.
You have 30 seconds.
I will do my best. First of all, I ask that any of your viewers Google, as they're watching this, Referendum C audit. And what you will quickly find on the legislative website is a table that shows you exactly how Referendum C dollars were spent when we had a very similar debate back in 2005 and passed Referendum C. And what you will see is exactly how those dollars were spent. And I'm more than happy to discuss, you know, the issues that the opposition is bringing up about how those dollars are spent. But to this day, we continue to account for how Referendum C dollars are spent. The exact same procedure will be used for Proposition CC. So that's the first point I want to make. I also think we need to discuss on this program the very erroneous numbers that the opposition is using in terms of budget growth. They talk about, you know, a $30 billion budget. The fact of the matter is, when we talk about the taxes that Coloradans pay, we're talking about a $12 billion general fund budget, and we cannot find any scenario in which the budget has grown by 300%. And the only way we think we can approximate that is if you don't adjust for population and inflation, if you use only raw numbers, and you use very large numbers that look at federal funds, cash funds, and general funds. So let's argue about the facts rather than just making up really big numbers that completely distort the reality of the state budget, which on average has only grown about 4% when you adjust for population and inflation.
All right, Michael, I want you
To answer your question about the guarantee, there isn't a guarantee. This would really be a blank check to the legislature. And Casey Becker's quote, the Speaker of the House, said, "We can't tie the hands of future legislators. They can do whatever they want." But what they want to do is tie the hands of future taxpayers and say this is a permanent taking away of your refund. This refund would be $1.7 billion according to the governor, projections over the next 3 years. This is a lot of money over time. But I think to Scott's point about the budget growth, Pew Research came out with a study about, since the recession happened in 2008, how much have general funds grown across the country. Colorado is number 2 in the country. Number 1 is North Dakota. Obviously, they had a big oil and gas boom there. But we are spending more and more out of our general fund and the larger budget. What we have to have a discussion is, where is that money going, right? And do they need more of that, or is that money back, back in taxpayers' hands better?
All right. Well, keep in mind also, I mean, if you use the recession as your baseline, you're going to have,
compared to other states.
We fell the farthest.
But nevertheless,
Michael,
no,
we fell the
understand.
farthest, and the Pew study, actually, if you read the study, goes on to talk about how the reason Colorado ranks so high in that is because Colorado was among the states that fell the farthest and had to bounce back the most. That's what we found in the study.
Hold on, George. I have a question, because I think one of the really interesting issues that no one is discussing is certainly we elect representatives, we have a legislature, a governor, and the idea as voters, as citizens, we want them to do the right thing. We want them to have the resources they need to make the state the way we want it, in terms of whether it be transportation or education or wildlife or natural resources, whatever the case may be. It seems, and I want Michael and George to address. It seems to me that the bottom line is that you don't trust government with that money. Is that what this is really about?
I don't trust a legislature to come up with, we're going to tax people. I come from Illinois, and they just raise taxes whenever they want. Now 100,000 net people are leaving each year. I look at this and say, the legislature is very busy during those 5 months that they're in session. They're doing 500 bills. They're figuring out how to spend money, how to pass, legislation. All we're saying is, if you want more of our money, and this is what Tabor does, you have to convince people. If you want to do a bullet train or single-payer health care or anything, you want to grow government, you have to go to the people and decide. So I trust people more. And this is about ultimately repealing Tabor. And Scott is somebody who wants to repeal Tabor. He wants to raise taxes, and this is the first step in that line. And so this is why the other side's fighting so hard. It's not about this Prop CC money as much as it's about how do we get rid of Tabor and go after a progressive tax increase.
Doesn't it do the
This is
opposite?
doing what Tabor asked us to do, which
Right.
is, to me, is extremely important. We are asking the voters that question, and I absolutely do believe in that. I think part of the accountability, yes, there will be an independent audit that will happen annually, which is very important. We've seen how that's worked with Referendum C. But we also, as citizens, we have the accountability when we go to the ballot box in November to vote in those representatives who represent us at the legislature, on our local school boards. That is also a level of accountability that we as citizens have a responsibility to hold them accountable.
So, Michael, I want to address that because I think this measure does the opposite in terms of what you think, in terms of what you believe Scott wants to do in terms of getting rid of Tabor. And the reason is, if this measure passes, the two key provisions of Tabor still remain. I mean, one is that if there is a desire for a tax increase, an increase in tax rates, for example, the legislature, government entities, whatever, still have to come to us, the people, for permission to do that. And so it seems to me that this undermines an effort to get rid of Tabor.
Well, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think you look at the supporters, the people who are giving big money. I mean, they're over $2 million now on money raised. These donors who are giving it want to repeal Tabor. They want to get rid of it. And they say, look, if we can't win a debrucing measure with this kind of ballot language, how can we go on next year or the year after and repeal Tabor? I agree. I think voters should be able to decide on this, and I'm glad they are. But the only time that you hear that argument from this side of things is when they want more money, right? So Governor Polis wants to cut taxes. He wants to do a 3 to 5% cut to income taxes and fill in some loopholes. You don't see anybody on that side saying, put that on the ballot too and let people decide about a tax cut.
Though my understanding is he actually tried to do that. But Scott, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if I may, because people keep talking about what I want to do. I mean, I'll be very
You're a
clear with you.
popular guy,
yeah,
Scott.
I guess so. I mean, what I would argue is, I will tell you, like, my alternative slogan for Proposition CC is Proposition CC, the least we can do. If I had my druthers, yes, we would have sufficient revenue to fund our roads. We'd have sufficient revenue to pay our teachers well. We'd have sufficient revenue to make sure everyone can access a community college and make sure they get a higher education and go on to a better life, right? I mean, that's our goal. Regarding our taxation, you mentioned a progressive tax. I mean, one of the things that we don't talk about when we talk about Tabor is the fact that that it explicitly bans a progressive tax system where people who are wealthier pay more. And that's exactly the kind of paradox we have in this state, where we have very wealthy people doing very well, not paying their fair share. So yes, one day, personally, I would like for Colorado to have a conversation about who ought to pay the right tax burden. And I'd be very interested in lowering tax rates for people at the lower income scale, people in the middle, if we're raising tax. But that is not the question that's on the ballot. And I think what's interesting is that the opposition wants to fast forward and have that debate when that is not at all the debate that is happening today. And the debate that is happening today is, should your community improve as the economy improves?
All right, so okay, we only have a few minutes left, so make it quick.
Proposition CC is the hand on the knee. And if we don't brush it away now, next year, they're going to try to make a huge pass at you and stick their tongue down your throat to get rid of Tabor. That's what this is. This is an attempt to test Colorado's resolve on this issue. And
only a district attorney could make those allusions. I got
by deceit, too, by the way.
This is a respect to the voters by asking the voters the question and saying, what is the will? What is your will, voters, to
Then tell them the
live in a
truth
great
about it.
Colorado?
Tell them the
right.
truth.
So and I think and your point, Amy, is that under Tabor, if you want to make a change, you are required to ask the voters. You want to make a change, you're asking the voters. It's up to them. Okay, some really quick questions, because we only have like 5 minutes left. One of the claims of the opponents is that this is going to hurt seniors and veterans. Michael, tell me how you believe that's the case.
Yeah, so the way the money is refunded right now, it goes to senior homestead tax exemption and veterans. And basically, if you look at that, the state helps backfill that with this refund money. This is going to put a lot of pressure. If we want to keep senior homestead, it puts a lot of pressure on local governments in order to come up with that money to backfill it, because
money.
all the refund money now would go to these three things.
Let's get a response.
So that is completely incorrect. The state has a constitutional, it's not statutory, it's in the Constitution to fund the homestead exemption. The only time when we have not funded the homestead exemption was during the Great Recession. Other than that, and the only reason it comes down to Tabor rebates is because of a statutory change we made 2 years ago to ensure that if we were over the cap, that we would make sure that we were. So that is a completely erroneous claim,
All right, so-
and we have a constitutional. It will come out of general fund
All
dollars.
right, let me summarize this and tell me if I'm incorrect. Number one is for seniors and veterans, that money will be appropriated regardless of whether or not this passes. Hold on, let me finish. That's part one. That's part one. But part two is that currently that refund money has been used at times to pay for those needs. Are those both accurate statements?
Sort of, kind of.
Okay, I'm good enough with that. I'd like to talk longer. One of the claims that the opponents have made is that this is a permanent erasure of taxpayers' ability to get refunds. Is there anything to stop us as taxpayers if we decide that the money isn't being spent appropriately? Is there anything to stop us from coming back to the ballot and reinstating refunds or amending Tabor in another way? Is there anything, you're the lawyer on well, there are more than one, but you tell me, George. Is there anything to stop us from coming back in 5 or 10 years and saying, hey, you didn't do what you said you were going to do, we're taking our refunds back?
No, but look, under that standard, we could do anything to the Constitution at any time that we wanted to do.
Well, Colorado has, and you know that well. So.
Yeah, but we've failed a lot more than we've tried. I mean, all the efforts to try to cripple Tabor or to fund $1 trillion for this, that, or the other, they fail at the ballot box when they have to use accurate language. The reality is that this is not a question of could we do it. It's a question of why not time limit it? Why not do what Referendum C did, which, by the way, is a joke and a failure. The idea that we audit the money Referendum C was supposed to pay for and say, look, it went for that, is deceptive, because what they don't tell you is that they didn't add that to existing revenues and things that were spent on higher education. They substituted it. That's that fungibility issue that you brought up. And here's the proof of that. Before Referendum C, about 12.4% of the general fund went to higher education. During Ref C, it skyrocketed to 9.9%. And then after Ref C, it continued to climb all the way to 8.4%.
And
so
somewhere along the way, there was a Great Recession in which we had to slash and burn the budget and had to fund mandatory expenditures like K through 12 education and Medicaid. And the only thing that was not protected, and if you talk to higher education, they will tell you they did not have a statutory or constitutional protection for their funding. And that's why you never want to account for the economics that went on during that time.
I also want to
$8 billion hole in K-12 education.
yes.
I mean, that we haven't been able to climb out of.
All right, hold on, George. Amy, talk a little bit more. I didn't quite understand that. Tell me more about that.
So since the Great Recession, we have been underfunding our public schools to the tune of $8 billion. And what does that mean?
Is that the negative factor?
It
Or is
was
that part of it?
previously the negative factor, and it's now called the budget stabilization factor, or the BS factor, which is
I would not call it the BS factor, but
which is
I don't think that's a plus for K through 12 education.
Well, the legislature came up with that term, but not us. But
you need to talk to Casey
But I think
Becker.
our students feel that on a daily basis when they don't have the adequate mental health supports that they need and deserve, when they have large class sizes, when they have teachers who can't afford to work and live in the communities that they teach, teachers working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. We have taken art, music, and PE, all the things that make a well-rounded education for our students away, and we have an $8 billion hole. We're asking the voters, our economy is doing well. Do you want your public goods to do well also?
Listen,
Do our students not deserve this?
How do I know
They
as
do.
a taxpayer? How do I know as a taxpayer that if this passes, am I going to see class sizes go down?
No.
Am I going to see teacher pay go up because
Go
of
to
this?
teacher
Well,
pay. It can't go to teacher pay.
why not?
Why not?
Because it says non-reoccurring expenses. If you ask Casey Becker, which I've debated and done forums with her, she said this cannot go to base teacher pay. It's something that you look at.
Well, those are local,
Just so you know,
those are local decisions.
Casey was invited to be on the show and originally was going to be on the show. So I don't want anyone watching feel that we're abusing Casey unfairly. So, but go ahead. What's your bottom line?
That it cannot go to teacher pay, and enough of our education money is not getting into classrooms, is not getting into instruction.
Let's say recruit and retain teachers.
Only 54% of the money that we spend on education gets into the classroom. People want to see more money going to teachers, not in administration, not other costs. And until that happens, we have to have a discussion. If I'm a teacher, I'm very upset about the fact that education spending is going up and my paycheck is not going up.
So here's my proposal. Why don't we raise sustainable revenue streams to make sure that we have ongoing, and what's funny to me is that 2 years ago, Colorado voters were asked whether or not they wanted a sustainable revenue stream, for example, for transportation. And groups like Americans for Prosperity instead said, no, you need to prioritize. Let's use money coming in the existing budget. We do not have, the state of Colorado does not have a sustainable revenue stream to pay for bonds for the $9 to $11 billion of transport. Then what do you want to cut?
No, we don't have to cut anything. Hospital provider
we don't have
fee
to cut
led
anything.
$600 million into the budget that we could bond for the long term in order to do it.
Those dollars are completely different.
People voted on that last year. That source that you're talking about, Amendment 73, they could have voted to increase taxes, and it
got
lost.
pretty darn close.
It lost.
But the point is what do you want to cut? You guys keep
Don't have to
saying
cut
you
anything.
keep
Our budget's
casting
going
down.
up $1 billion
We don't need to cut
plus dollars.
anything.
So
we
hold
don't
on,
need to cut
hold on, hold
anything,
on.
and it's not going up $1
All
billion.
right. So what bottom line is, if you're saying the money is there, and clearly 100% of the budget gets spent every year.
More than 100% this last time, yeah. They've
Okay,
overspent the budget.
that's a separate issue. So what out of the state budget today, if you wanted to, let's say, I think it's well established that for roads that we're behind about $9 billion in maintenance. If you look at the need to expand roads because of the growth in the state, growth in our economy, that total could be as much as $20 billion. Where in the budget would you get the money? If you bonded that, you'd probably need, I'm going to just quickly calculate, maybe $700 million a year to bond that. Where would you get $700 million out of the budget?
I think the argument right now is that there's about $3.5 billion of shovel-ready jobs that we need to do on transportation. That was a discussion that we had last year on both sides, agreeing that it would be about $300 to $350 million that you would need to bond. But really quickly, I want to go. They have overspent the budget next year by $100 million.
No. You're not answering my question is, okay, if they've overspent the budget, then there's even less room in the budget. I want to know.
I trust them with more money.
To solve and clearly, Proposition CC doesn't do it. But to solve our transportation problems long term and have the kind of roads and highways Coloradans want and need, to have the kind of roads and highways that our economy and a growing economy needs, where do we get $700 million a year?
We have taken a lot of that $600 million from the hospital provider fee a couple years ago, put it into education and into transportation. What they won't do is commit that money long term, right? So we are putting hundreds of millions of dollars more into transportation in the last 2 years. What we need to do is bond that amount and start paying for these things. What we need to do is take the education money that we're spending, put it into the right spot, right? Put it into teacher pay and into instruction. Then we can have a discussion, do we need more money after that? But we are spending it in those areas.
What I would wish more than anything, and I said this on Twitter to George, is I would love for you guys to be on the Joint Budget Committee. I would love for you to weigh day after day the decisions that face that committee, because they do prioritize. And you keep talking about hospital provider fee. Those are specific dollars that bring down federal matching dollars for health care. They have nothing to do with
It's
transportation.
opening up the money in the budget.
No,
Right.
but
$600 million in the budget.
You're living
under
in
the Tabor
Tabor
cap.
Wonderland. And in Tabor Wonderland, you're constantly obsessed with where are we in terms of the Tabor limit, and we're talking about the real world concerns of Coloradans who right now are upset that their schools are not adequately funded, are stuck in traffic on I-70 and I-25, and who can't, and we have the second highest higher educational attainment gap in the country, and yet we say we have the #1 economy.
Okay, so one of the things we didn't talk about, and we've got to wrap up, is that I want to get to quickly is higher education. 20 years ago or so, the state covered about 2/3 of kids' tuition, at college. Today, it's down to 1/3. A lot of families cannot afford to go to college, and even going routes where it's relatively inexpensive, like community colleges, and we've got a great community college system here in Colorado. This is a huge problem funding for a university like the University of Colorado, the state used to provide approximately half the funding for CU. Now, if you look at the total budget, including research, et cetera, it's under 10%. Some are saying it's like 7% is provided by the state. Where do we get the resources, or should we, to fund our institutions of higher education, community college, four-year colleges, other training, so that our kids are prepared for the economy of the future? Michael.
I think that's a good question. I think when you look at it, higher education is a much more complex issue given how much the costs go up and everything that's happening across the country, and you have to be competitive with facilities and everything else. I think what it does, my answer would be Prop CC doesn't fix that problem. And you look at somebody like Hank Brown, who was the president, a former senator, president of CU. He supported Ref C and then said, look, we were lied to about we were going to get more money. That did not happen. So he's on our side of this. And Governor Owens is the same way and said, look, we had a problem in 2005. He really helped support and pass Ref C, and now he is saying vote against Prop CC. So looking at it and saying, you know what, I think that's a great discussion to have about higher education and what we want to do with it, but Prop CC doesn't do anything about it.
I think when you look at the current university presidents that are supporting Prop CC and the deans, and this really is about what is the Colorado that we want and deserve. When we have families who can't afford to go to higher education, that hurts all of us as citizens of this state. That is our future. If we can't produce and have those students going into higher education or who are coming out, this leads in large part to the teacher shortage that we're seeing here in Colorado, because students are coming out with massive amounts of college loan debt, and then they can't afford to work and live in the communities where they teach. So yeah, this is about what is the system that we want, what is the Colorado that we want, and we're asking the voters that. Do you want a system where only the few can go to higher ed, or do we want a system where no matter what your zip code is, you can have access to that American dream, that Colorado dream, for the Colorado that we all want and deserve?
All right, is it fair to say that with the division, with the amount of money we're talking about, which for the total budget is actually relatively small, to be honest with voters, and the fact that it's divided three ways between K through 12 education, higher education, roads and transportation, that passage of Proposition CC, why it will help address these issues, it doesn't really come close to solving the major problems in any of these three areas. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
That is fair.
All of you would agree. So one of the things that I'm certainly willing to do is, if this passes, I will review, and with my audience, if available, the audit each year. And because one of the issues I'm most interested in is this fungibility issue. Voters need to know, are these dollars going into the budget, and then is the legislature taking money out of the budgets for those categories and using it elsewhere? And if they do, I think voters should throw the rascals out. But of course we won't know unless it passes and we get to see. In tracing that, we'll see how good that audit is, because the key is what's going on. Obviously we know that if a budget for higher education gets cut, we know the promise has not been kept. But if it goes up by just the amount from Proposition CC, I'm going to be suspicious, because it should have gone up to some extent anyway. Anyway, we're more than out of time. Scott, Amy, Michael, George, thank you so much. Remember to vote on November 5th. You will actually be getting ballots. This is a mail ballot for the most part. You'll be getting ballots before then. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.